had intended to start painting the camouflage in this video, but when I sat down to actually do it, I realized that there were a few things missing on the hull that need to be installed before I paint. The first thing that I need to do is replace those oval hatches that I'd removed from the step in the hull, and then the second thing is to install the Skegs. Since both of these components are really integral to the hull, it doesn't make sense to paint before they are installed. So that is what I'm going to do in this video. FlyHawk has provided a lot of these oval hatches, far more than are actually required to replace the oval hatches that were molded onto these steps originally. Typically you see kits with extra components when it is a kit that's made for multiple ships in the same class, or ships that share common components, and then it's just a repeat sprue that is used in multiple kits. The other time you see it is with particularly small or delicate components where there's a likelihood that you're going to damage or lose some of them. Then the manufacturer will provide you with a few extra. But in this case, these components are quite large and they have provided a lot of them. So I don't really know why we have so many, but we have more than we need. So I suppose that's better than the alternative. To glue the hatches in place, I'm using medium viscosity super glue. Normally I only use a very small amount of medium or thick viscosity super glue just to tack the Photo-etch component in place before I reinforce the bond with extra thin super glue. In this case, because I drilled holes to help locate where these hatches should go, there is some space for the excess super glue to flow. So I'm happy to put on a little bit more and then forego having to tack down this Photo-etch with extra thin super glue. That makes the installation of these hatches go just that little bit faster, and I still get a nice clean look without any excess super glue oozing out of the side of the Photo-etch. For the most part, I'm able to get each of these hatches correctly positioned before the super glue sets, but in a few cases I do mess it up and the glue tacks it in place too strong for me to move it, and I have to lift it off with a blade and then scrape off the super glue and reseat the Photo-etch. Fortunately, that didn't happen too often, and this being a fairly easy to access area with flat Photo-etch on a flat surface, doing that isn't too much of an issue. When it came to the port side of the ship, the thing that I was initially concerned about was getting the positioning of these hatches to be identical, and I tried to mark it out with the map divider just to make sure I had everything in the exact same space. But after putting on the first few hatches, I realized that it doesn't actually really need to be perfectly symmetrical. There actually isn't an orientation of this hull where you can see both rows of hatches and see that they're not symmetrical across the ship. So after bothering with that for the first few, I decided to not bother so much with its perfect symmetrical positioning and then just used the holes that I had previously drilled to locate the rest of the hatches. As with the starboard side of the ship, I just used medium viscosity super glue to glue them all down. Now that all the hatches are installed, I'm going to move on to the Skegs. The Skegs for the South Dakota class of battleships I think is actually unique among battleships. It has these two large piers that enclose this very flat underside of the hull. It looks very odd, but apparently it helps improve the hydrodynamic performance of the hull. In terms of building the model, it means that although this ship has 4 screws, you only really need to install Skegs for 2 of them. The other 2 are just little stubs that stick out of the side of these piers, which is pretty easy to install, and there's not much to do over there. Regardless of which type of Skeg and prop shaft I'm going to install, the starting point is exactly the same. Remove the components from the sprue. The first thing that I notice about these Skegs and propeller shaft assemblies is that the propeller shaft is actually very thick. I don't know if that's because these parts have been molded out of scale, or if it's because the South Dakota class of battleships had unusually large diameter propeller shafts. Regardless of whether these propeller shafts are accurate or not, the reality is that having a wider propeller shaft just makes them easier to work with. There's more plastic and they're stronger. In this case, that is not entirely a bad thing because unfortunately there is a fair amount of flashing and some ugly seam lines that need to be removed. It's not too bad. Both sides of the mold have been fairly well aligned, so the seam line and the flashing is quite easy to remove, added to the fact that it is a thicker than usual propeller shaft, and cleaning these parts up is not difficult at all. An added bonus is that Trumpeter for a change decided to put the injection points for this part in a reasonable place, which means removing them is also easy, so all round cleanup of these parts has not been a problem. As for the rudders, they are also well molded and there's not much flashing on them. For the most part, the injection points are in reasonable places. I could have done without this injection point on this sharp trailing edge of the rudder, I don't know why they needed to put it there, but fortunately though, there isn't any detail in that area of the rudder, which means it is quite easy to remove that injection point and file the plastic back to create a nice sharp edge. After cleaning up all the plastic components, I do a quick test fit. Of all of these components, the only ones that need to go on a specific side of the ship are these small propeller shafts. They have a small recess in the detail that aligns with the edge of these piers, and if they aren't on the correct side of the ship, that will clash with the pier and they won't sit correctly. As for the inner skegs and rudders, those are symmetrical components. Interestingly though, the inner skegs do have different numbers, which implies they are different, but I couldn't see any difference. I inspected them quite closely and tried them in each other's position, and it doesn't seem like there's any difference between the two. As for the rudders, they have the same part number, so they are identical. After the test fit, I'm happy with how everything is sitting, so I can proceed to gluing them in place. All of these components need to be glued in place through rather large holes, so I'm going to help fill up that hole a little bit using Revell Contactor Professional, which is quite a thick plastic cement. After applying the plastic cement, I place the inner skegs in position and then hold them down using a paint jar and tape. Once securely in position, I reinforce the bond using extra thin plastic cement. The front of the propeller shafts where they enter the hull are then also held down with another jar of paint and tape. Next, the rudders are installed. They are immediately held in place fairly firmly by the previously applied thick plastic cement. This gives me plenty of time to ensure that they are standing vertically and that they are parallel to the center line of the ship and each other. Once I'm happy with the orientation, I reinforce the bond using extra thin plastic cement. At this point, the plastic cement for the inner skegs has sufficiently dried to hold them in place, so the tape and jars are removed, and then glue is applied to install the small propeller shafts that go on the side of these piers. The same process is used again. A small amount of plastic cement is applied to the holes, the propeller shaft is then placed into position, and once correctly positioned, its bond is reinforced with extra thin plastic cement. After giving the plastic cement a good amount of time to dry, the seam lines can then be cleaned up. Starting with a needle file, I remove any excess plastic cement that has oozed out from between the components and formed a bump, after which the area is sanded with a 400 grit sanding sponge and then a 1000 grit sanding cloth. After ensuring that the area has been cleaned of all sanding dust, I spray it with Mr. Surfacer to help reveal any defects in the plastic and to leave a nice surface for painting. I also spray the surfacer over the hatches and the step in the hull. Once again, I want to reveal defects, this time to see if there has been any clear superglue that has seeped out from the side of these hatches, and to ensure that all the hatches are properly glued down and there are no gaps underneath them and the step in the hull. Fortunately, the surfacer didn't reveal any defects, which means that this hull is now ready for painting, which I will do in the next video. If you don't want to wait for the scheduled release of videos and want to watch them when they are uploaded, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. If you would like to support the channel, like and subscribe, and as always, questions are welcome in the comments. Thank you for watching. Cheers.